We've got David here, and we are doing the wrap up of the 15 Nations Global Tour for Panama. And if you are new to these broadcasts, just quickly what the 15 Nations Global Tour is. To celebrate the 15th anniversary of WikiTree, David is spearheading a project to basically go through the world and kind of highlight and focus on a country for 3 weeks at a time. And so far, we've done 8 countries. This is our 8th stop on that tour. So we are talking about Panama. If you want to go back and look at these other countries that they did and see what all was done, the link to this page, the 15 Nations Global Tour space page, is in the description of this video. So you can follow that to get to this page. But today we're focusing on wrapping up the 3 weeks that they focused on Panama. So David.
We were having a little technical problems before. Can you hear and see me now?
Before we start to have a little bit of technical difficulties, I think it's actually that was having the problem. Sorry about that.
Yes.
So I'm going to let you just kind of take over. I'll draw.
Okay.
Just tell me where you go.
And let me confirm if anybody in the chat room can let me know that my voice is being heard. That would be helpful. Okay, good. Yeah, I had the same problem with Azure's breaking up, so I want to make sure that wasn't me as well. Okay, well, welcome everybody. We are here. It seems way too soon, but we're already here to wrap up our Panama project. This past month was a little bit busy for me, so I didn't get to participate as much as I usually enjoy doing and get to do with Panama. I am currently visiting my father in California. I'm regularly from Texas. I grew up in California, but I am here on vacation and using somebody else's computer in somebody else's office. So it's, like I said, a little discombobulating for me, but that's okay. I'll get through this. The big news for me, I was offline for most of the weekend. I was in flight and driving from airport to airport, et cetera, and I didn't get to check in a whole lot. And when I checked in last night, I found out that we had doubled the number of Panamanians we had connected just in the short time I was gone. So we actually had connected, last count that I saw, 8 of our 15 Panamanian notables, which is an amazing number. I think, and I have the numbers here, but I hadn't checked, but I think that puts us in either first or second place, which if you'd gone back 3 days ago, we were probably in next to last place or so as far as the number of connections. So that's really pretty amazing. It really fascinates me, each country we go to. There's a lot of similarities, but each one is so different. The process winds up being so different from the ones before. So as much as I think we're learning in some countries, and a lot of it does carry over, there's so much more to learn in terms of methodology, et cetera, with each of the nations we're visited, and Panama's not been an exception. I expected, given the Panama Canal Zone and the relationship to the United States, I had expected that we would find connections much quicker and much more, much more rapidly to the United States. And that really wasn't the case. We took quite a while to get most of these connected. And when we did, they weren't all through the United States. They were, many of them through England and also Australia, New Zealand. So that was a surprise. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those. Yeah, so it was a surprise, which, as I said, almost, it seems like each of our 9 countries or 8 countries so far has been full of surprises for me. My predictions do not always pan out, but often that's more for the better than the worse. So that's a good thing. So we have a combination. We don't always get a whole lot of members viewing this live, but we do get a lot of people that tune in later. It's really difficult when you're working with a global, literally a worldwide project to find a time that's convenient for everybody. So while it may be nighttime at your house, other people may be at work or sound asleep. So we get a wide range of people that check in later, from people who know nothing about our project and are just curious, to some of our regular members who make this almost a daily project, yet are not able to unfortunately make it to the live chat. So I want to kind of try to accommodate both ends of the spectrum. Talk about some of the technical stuff that we've done, but also for people that really don't know anything about our project and are just learning for the first time, I want to kind of show you what it's all about, and see if we can get you maybe interested in helping us with our next stop, which will be the second half of this conversation, telling you where we're going next. And the next one, I'll give you a heads up, I think is going to be one of our toughest challenges. But then again, I'm always wrong, as I just said, so we'll see. Um, So for Panama, as I said, we connected 8 of our notables. I'm gonna go to, I don't know if Azure's even on at this point. Um, if you are Azure, it looks like you're moving the mouse, so maybe you are, but if you are, I'd like to go to the Panama page. If you're not, I'll give you a minute and I'll see if I can figure out how to get it up. Oh, there you are. Okay, so you're there. Good. So if you could scroll down to our list of notables. There you go. Okay, and so let's just start. We'll just go down and show the 8 people that we connected. Tomas de Herrera, he was the president of a nation that was known as, well, 2 nations. One was known as the State of the Isthmus, and the other was the Republic of New Granada. Those were both Panama before Panama became Panama. So it went through a couple different structures after it broke off from Colombia. For those who are not familiar with Panamanian history, it was most of South America obviously was part of the Spanish Empire. Colombia gained its independence at a certain point, and that at that time included um, Panama as well as much of northern South America. In time, and so Tomas de Herrera was the president of those 2 iterations of Panama. Our second individual here, Manuel Amador Guerrero, was actually the first president of Panama. So there was a revolution, a very short-lived revolution. My understanding was a fairly nonviolent revolution, but the people of Panama overthrew the government, and Manuel Amador Guerrero became the first president of Panama at that point. And so those 2 individuals were both connected. Our next individual, we had not much in the way of leads on her. She was a female poet from Panama, the first female poet of Panama, lived primarily during the 1800s. And up until this weekend, we had 0 information on her. We just had no leads, but we did find, Darren actually found a family search, family tree for her. It is, I'll say it's poorly sourced, but it's not completely unsourced. So I spent some time this morning seeing what information we could pull out of it. We do have on that family tree a baptismal certificate for her grandson, and that baptismal certificate lists his parents, which includes her daughter, and also lists all 4 of his grandparents. So we've got something there that we can put a couple profiles up. I didn't get a chance to put them up, but we've at least got one source there. One of the big problems we have with a lot of these people, dilemmas we wind up dealing with, is that we find family trees on Ancestry or Family Search, or even just on individual websites that people have put up, but they don't source their family trees. They don't source where they get the information from. And so we may have a family tree for a famous person that has 35 relatives connected to it, but we have no way of verifying that any of them are accurate or not. I tend to think they probably are accurate, for the most part, but unless we can validate that, as with, general WikiTree policy, we don't put stuff up without a source. Um, and that's unfortunate because somebody's gone through a lot of work and, apparently just doesn't have the training or knowledge to post their sources with the information. And that's what we were running into with her. But again, I did see that they had that one baptismal certificate. We'll see if they have anything else. So we may still wind up connecting her, um, you know, despite the fact that we're leaving Panama. Something I always emphasize for people is when we leave a country, the website stays up and you can always go back and keep working on it. Our goal is to get these people connected, and the fact that Monday comes and pass shouldn't hinder us from continuing to work if we've got some things we can still accomplish. And if you're bored with the country or frustrated with the country we're currently working on, you can go back to India, you can go back to Malaysia, any of our other countries. And in fact, Paul, who's not with us today, one of our key members, he spent some time, went back to our first nation of India and actually made some connections in India this week that we'd missed the first time around. So that's really great news. Um, Narisco Gary, he was a composer, also did some diplomatic work. He has a father who was notable in and of himself as one of Panama's most famous artists, and his sister, I believe, was also I can't remember if she was a composer or an author, but she was also somewhat notable in and of herself. But we were not able to get them connected to the big tree. So I think we only have 8 connections for that family. So several prominent people, but no connections. The next individual here, President Arnulf Arias Madrid. He was the president of Panama 3 times. He got overthrown in coups each time, but seemed to be able to come back unscathed and had a long, healthy life. An interesting thing about him, he is connected now. And in connecting him, we were also able to connect his wife, who I don't know if Alger, if you could open his profile up so I can make sure I get names and dates right here. If you scroll down to his wife, no, do we not have her on there? All right, scroll up just a little. Oh, okay, you got a different format over here. Private wife. Okay. Well, I'm not going to get her name right, but anyway, his wife was something like 40 years younger than him. He married her when she was a teenager, and he was a, um, well, middle-aged man, probably 40s or so. Um, he died, but she went on to become president herself, became the first female president of Panama. And that wasn't too long ago. That was probably I think in the 2000s, just a couple presidents ago. So I just find that interesting that she went from being this teenage girl marrying this middle-aged man, um, and wound up years later becoming president of the country. Um, in part, but probably not fully based on that relationship. But so now both of those presidents are now connected. So by connecting one, we've connected two, and that's always really a cool thing to do. We've got an Olympic athlete here, Adelaide Lambert. I believe her family went to, yeah, she was eventually wound up in Washington in the United Washington State. So she's one that we were able to connect through her American um, connections. Edward A. Murphy Jr. He was another interesting character to put on here. He is the namesake of Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law says anything that can go wrong will go wrong. But according to Murphy, that's not what today it's seen as kind of a doom and gloom philosophy. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. But what he intended it as was a motivational um, statement that he was an engineer in the military, quite prominent in the work that he did. And his advice to people that he trained was to be aware that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So you need to be ready for it. So it was more of a be prepared kind of statement than a doom and gloom. Nothing's ever going to go right kind of statement. So that was interesting. But he also had American connections, so we were able to get him connected. Lloyd LaBeach was one that we just connected recently. He is a Panamanian Olympic sprinter. If I remember right, he's the first gold medalist from Panama. I'm pretty certain I'm correct on that. I just discovered that he was connected today, so I'm not sure what route we were able to find, but I do note that he died in New York City. So again, he probably has American connections in there. Um, you'll notice here, we only are on this trip for 3 weeks, so we do the connections, and that tends to be our focus. But something I always emphasize as well, if you've got time or an inclination to go back and work on building up some of these profiles. This is kind of a short biography here. Um, if he's living in the United States, we may have census records, et cetera, that we can pull, flesh out some of his personal story. But it's not all just about making connections. That's kind of how we keep score. It's something we're a little bit conditioned to do. But we always welcome to people to come back and go in and just write up the biographies, look for additional sources, even if they're connected, if you can find more family members. The purpose, for those that are not familiar, going back to the beginning, the purpose of this project, the reason we created it, was not simply to connect notables. There's a lot of projects that do that. What we really are, what our real mission is to increase the profile of each of the nations that we're focusing in on. What we want to be able to do is what we're hoping is down the road, somebody from Panama can come in and have a good chance of connecting their family to a Panamanian profile, to another Panamanian family. What we have to do now with most of these is we have to find a connection to America, a connection to England, sometimes Australia, New Zealand. Um, but we don't have the profiles in those countries to make the connections in those countries. That's what we'd really like to change. So while it's great to get these people connected, that's really important. We want to go beyond that and continue to add family members, because every family member you connect, creates another opportunity for somebody to connect their family to it. So again, that's really our mission, is to create more profiles as opposed to simply making connections. Although again, making the connections important, because um, you can have a family of 100 people, and if they're not connected, you're not going to be fully integrated into the tree. So Carlos Fuentes, I believe, is another one who we didn't connect. We really couldn't find a whole lot on him. He is a novelist, fairly prominent in Latin America. Um, but his profile still needs a lot of work. We'd like to find a connection. We'd like to find more family members. We had, very few connections on him. The further, I post the notables chronologically from the earliest birth to the latest. So the further down the list we go, you'll find the fewer connections we make, and that's natural, because with living people in particular, the records aren't there. The family may still be living, brothers, sisters, etc. So it becomes more of a challenge. Ironically, more recent celebrities are often harder to connect than people from the past. If we can scroll down a little further, we've got two Panamanian dictators here. Here we go. So let's skip over one and go to Manuel Noriega, because he's one that everybody knows. Um, whether you're a serious Panamanian historian, or you just paid attention to the news back several decades ago when I was, I won't say a kid, but college and young adult, Manuel Noriega was very prominent in the news. He was the president and basically the dictator of Panama, and he was ultimately charged with drug trafficking. The United States government went to Panama and basically captured him, brought him to Florida, put him on trial, and he spent, I believe, 17 years in prison in Florida. He then he was then extradited, I believe, to France, and then back to Panama again. So he wound up dying in prison. somewhat of a ruthless individual. But he was very hard to connect for two reasons. Well, actually, on this one, there was quite a few reasons. Um, Dictators don't often share a lot about their personal life. They want to have a mythology about them, so they don't reveal all the intimate details. And we've talked about this before with many of our world leaders. In the United States, you know everything about Joe Biden's family, you know everything about Donald Trump's family, you know about the Clintons and the Obamas. Um, you don't know anything. We typically don't know anything about Vladimir Putin because the Russians don't share that information. I couldn't tell you who his brothers and sisters, or even if he has brothers and sisters, are. Who's his spouse or his children or his parents or his, you know, other relationships. The more dictatorial these people get, the more tyrannical they are, the less legitimate information they tend to put out there. That's from my experience. Manuel Noriega, got a little information on him, but his mother was a maid and she was impregnated by her employer, who was a accountant. I believe he may have some British. Um, he may have been a British ancestry, but I haven't been able to confirm that. Um, but we know a little else about the father. The mother, when he was 5 years old, his mother put him up for adoption. So he was not raised by either of his parents. So even his own knowledge of his family is probably very limited or was very limited. Um, he has no brothers and sisters. He has a wife who is still living, and he has three children who are still living. So, given the difficulties of tracing living people, particularly from a foreign country, we're not able to get very anywhere with his wife and his children, or his wife and his children. Um, we don't know anything about his parents, and he had no siblings. So, there's really not a lot of opportunities to trace his tree. It doesn't mean they're not there. It just means, finding that opening is going to be a real challenge, and we were not able to do that at this point. I skipped over Omar Trujillo's Herrera just because, from my knowledge of um, Panamanian history, it was easier to go with Noriega first because what I know of Herrera is that he was basically Noriega's mentor and predecessor. He was a dictator of um, Panama for many years prior to Manuel Noriega. He was killed in a mysterious plane or helicopter crash. Some people think Manuel Noriega may have had something to do with it. I don't know. That may just be speculation and mythology, but you'll come across that in various articles on the internet. Um, but either way, Noriega replaced him. Now he was not as much of a tyrant, from what I understand. I've actually heard him referred to as a benevolent dictator. He apparently did a lot of good things for Panama. And one of the things that he is most noted for is he's the individual who negotiated with Jimmy Carter regarding the transfer of the Panama Canal over to Panama. So, more notable than anything, I think, in his career was the fact that he was able to get the canal back for his country. Okay, so we'll scroll down. We got a couple more familiar faces coming up here. Rod Carew, famous baseball player. I used to watch him when I was a kid, so this one was a little bit special to me. Um, I can't say I knew him, but I feel like I knew him because he was really a big player, in my younger years. And he was able to be connected. I don't know the story of how he connected him so much. I wasn't able to get in there and trace that. But again, we did connect him. And right below him, we've got Roberto Duran, also somewhat of a legend from my younger years, famous boxer. We were not able to connect him. I believe we got 10 family members connected to him, but we were not able to get a connection to the tree. Next, we have Laurentino Cortez. I always include the current head of state and head of government. In some cases, such as Panama, that may be the same person. Um, Lorenzo Cortez is the current president of, or Cortizo, I believe is, I have Cortez and Cortizo written, but I believe Cortizo is the correct one. Um, he is not connected. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and double check, but I'm not sure we've yet connected any of our current world leaders. That's really intriguing to me how difficult that has been. Um, Again, I'd have to go back and double check to make sure I'm 100% correct on that, but out of our 8 countries, some of them having both a, um, president and a prime minister, I don't think we've connected any yet. And again, it's just because their leaders keep their business much more private than we're used to here in the US. I'm not sure how that is in, some of the other Western European countries like England and Australia, but, we don't have much privacy at all amongst for our politicians out here. And then Miguel Bose, he is a pop star in Panama, Latin America. He was an interesting one because his mother is a famous actress, I believe, from Italy, if I remember correctly. But even more interesting for me, his father was a famous Spanish bullfighter, and he came from a long line of Spanish bullfighters. So, yeah, there's his mother. Yeah, she's from Italy. Lucia Bose, I think I'm pronouncing it right. I may not be. And then his father, Luis Miguel Gonzalez Lucas. Um, Quite a few bullfighters in that family, and writing up the biographies for each one of them was really interesting. We don't have bullfighting here in the United States. Um, I actually went to a bullfight in Mexico many years ago when I was a child or a young boy, but it was a fascinating field to be researching, something that I don't know a lot about, and it just goes back to this whole concept that um, famous people tend to marry other famous people in their field, or have siblings and brothers and sisters. So when you get one notable, you get a whole lot of notables often connected. And if you go back to our India page, you'll see we started with 15 notables, and we were able to connect them to 51 other notables. And by notable, I mean they have individual pages on Wikipedia. So among those you see the list there. Among our 15 people, if you scroll down further, we'll see the additional 51 famous Indian people that we were able to connect to those original 15. And they all go all the way back to the 1800s, all the way up to some more famous people like the singer Nora Jones, whose father was an Indian musician and had quite a few connections. So that's always fascinating too. And the cool thing about that is um, if you connect, there's Nora Jones there. If you connect a notable to another notable, that opens up a whole lot of doors like biographies and web pages and stuff that have information, or even Wikipedia pages that have additional relatives and connections. So it's always kind of cool when you're able to make a connection from one notable to a next. So I wanted to go all the way back to the top of our Panama list to our first notable, and that would be President Thomas de Herrera. If we can open up his page. Um, for people that are new and don't really understand what we do or how we do it, I think from some of the feedback I've gotten from people who don't participate in our site is that it's really intimidating. Particularly, Panama may be a little more comfortable because it's Spanish speaking. A lot of people in the United States have some familiarity with Spanish, the Spanish language. But when you get into places like Malaysia and Kenya, people say, I don't know how to do Malaysian genealogy. There's no point in signing up for that project. Um, but I wanted to kind of take you through this to show um, it's to show some of our newer people how how little it often has to do with understanding, for example, Panamanian genealogy. So we start with Thomas Herrera. Again, he was the president of the State of the Isthmus and the Republic of Grenada. I don't know anything about those countries. They were actually part of Colombia. They're now considered Panama. So there's the question: are the records going to be in Colombia? Are they going to be in Panama? Do they exist at all? But what we're able to do, usually we just start out with WikiTree. Wikipedia. See what clues we can get there. Do a Google search. We will go to Google Books and see if you can find a biography on the person that may have information, sometimes even an autobiography that they wrote themselves. You could even go to Amazon.com, and if there's more recent books that Amazon's selling, they give you free samples, usually the first chapter, which is great because the first chapter is typically where people talk about where they were born and who their parents were and how they grew up. So sometimes just going to Amazon.com is all we need to get some breaks. So if we take a look at Panama, I'm sorry, Thomas Herrera, who was from Panama City, which was then New Spain, died in what was then New Grenada. But basically, he's Panamanian. Um, but he had a sister, Ramona, who married a man from Jamaica. So immediately, we're no longer in Panama. We're now doing research in Jamaica, which may not be of any better help to me because I don't know anything about Jamaican research, but maybe somebody else does. Um, but we're already out of Panama, despite doing a Panama project. This individual from Jamaica, when we were able to find the information we need on him, turns out his mother was British. So President Herrera's sister's husband's mother was from Britain. Now we've got a real potential for a link if we can find the British connection. Well, it turns out we didn't find the British connection. What happened was, well, first off, over the next couple of generations, I don't know the story. I just know that this family went back and forth from Jamaica to Britain. So I'm guessing there was some sort of business connection that the family had. But you had several nephews and cousins and people that were in Britain, and then they were in Jamaica, then they were back in Britain. And then all of a sudden, the president's sister's husband's mother, she had a sister whose grandson in 1842 moved to New Zealand, and he became a an interpreter for the Maori people in New Zealand, and lived in New Zealand for quite a while. Apparently, there were some hostilities that arose at some point, and he began to feel unsafe in New Zealand, and wound up moving his family to Australia. And once we get to Australia, I think Darren did a lot of this work. Once we got to Australia, we were able to make a connection through that country. So we went from Panama to Jamaica to England to New Zealand to Australia, and that's where we get our family connection. So if you don't know anything about Panamanian genealogy, that doesn't have to be an obstacle. You may be a person that knows Australian or British genealogy better than some of us, and you may be just the person we need to make that connection. So you never know. Um, and again, then there's others that we're not able to make any connections on because none of us know how to use the Panamanian sources, and it doesn't work. But don't think because of whatever country we're in, it's unfamiliar to you that you're not going to be able to be an asset to us. If nothing else, if you're not able to do research for us, you can also, as I said before, help us write some bios, help us structure our sources so that they read correctly and are fully linked and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of other stuff that needs to be done, even just proofreading to make sure you're catching spelling errors, that kind of thing is helpful. If we go to our next individual, I'll give a shorter but similar story to Manuel Amador Guerrero. He was the first president of Panama. His is a profile that I spent quite a bit of time on. Uh, I didn't make the connection, but I probably connected close to 40 of the 42 family members, and then somebody else was able to actually make the connection for me, which was great. Didn't find out very much at all about the president's family, but his wife, who was the first lady, is considered the mother of Panama. She had a very illustrious family. Lots of famous people in her line who were, they have their own Wikipedia pages. Her, she was, well, let's me say it. The president's son by his first wife designed the first Panamanian flag, and she sewed the first Panamanian flag. So in addition to being first lady, she's kind of the Betsy Ross of Panama, you might say. She had a sister that helped her, so her sister gets credit for that as well. A sister-in-law, rather. I believe it's her brother's wife. Um, when her husband died, she was still fairly young, and I think, if I remember, she went to France for a while, but then moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, and that's where she died. So again, we start out in Panama where we maybe don't know much about how to do the research, but just using Wikipedia and some biographical sources, figure out that she's now living in North Carolina, go to the census records, go to all the traditional vital records and stuff, and very quickly we're able to find her children, their children, grandchildren, spouses, etc., and eventually make the connection. So most of the research on, although we added quite a few Panamanian, famous Panamanians on that line, the research that led to our connection was almost all United States research. So again, I just want to throw that out there for people that again are maybe a little hesitant to join in with us because they're intimidated by the nations that we're visiting. That's part of the fun is I'm picking nations that are supposed to intimidate us a little bit. It's just like a tough crossword puzzle. You can do the New York Times crossword puzzle, or you can do the People Magazine crossword puzzle. Um, they're both crossword puzzles, but New York Times can be a little bit more intimidating than perhaps People Magazine. So anyway, that's kind of the gist of what we did in Panama, where we are with that. We have I think we made about 150 additional profiles, and as I've always emphasized when I make the statement on how many additional profiles we create, once we make a connection between one of our notables and the big tree, I'm no longer able to count additional profiles because they're just part of the main global tree. So we may have actually made quite a few, but there are 150 additional profiles that are not yet connected to the big tree. And again, that's 150 more Panamanian family members that somebody else may come down the road later on and be able to connect to. So that's really great news on top of everything else. Okay, so let's move before we click on it. And I want to give a little preface to our next nation. The United Nations divides the world into 15 regions. And that's a real convenient number because we're doing 15 weeks in honor of our 15th anniversary at WikiTree. So I am making a point of picking one nation from each of those 15 regions. And that sounded like a simple way to do things initially, but I'm finding that not only are some countries difficult to find 15 notables for, but sometimes the entire region is difficult to find 15 notables for. I found that I'm the wrap up tour last 3 weeks ago. I mentioned that with Panama. I went through, I think, 5 or 6 South American or Central American countries before I found one that had 15 usable notables. Countries that are more modern don't have historical notables outside of politics. And I do like to create diversity. I don't just want to give you 15 presidents or 15 generals. But a lot of these countries didn't have movie stars and sports figures and scientists even 100 years ago. So finding 15 notable people who are deceased that are not currently on WikiTree and who meet all the other criteria that we need them to has been a much bigger challenge than I thought. And Panama was a good example of that. Our next country was, I think, probably 10 times harder than Panama.
Do you want me to go ahead and play the video?
Oh, okay. So yeah, Azure has a video now to play. I'd forgotten about that. So we'll do that, and then I'll make the official announcement of where we're headed next.
Okay, here we go. And actually, this is going to show us what the country is. So
yeah, we'll see the country at the end, and then
here we go.
I'll let you.
So there we go. That's exciting.
Yeah, so thank you to Azure for putting that together. I think that's really cool. Just real quickly, for those that aren't aware, we do have the summer WikiTree WikiTree games coming up, I believe, in August.
Yes.
And, we're just kind of doing a little tie-in here. We will be hosting the WikiTree games from a special country that has already been chosen, but we will not be announcing that until it's time to announce the WikiTree games officially. But in the meantime, we have a couple more countries to visit. And as you saw in that video, we are now headed to West Africa and the nation of Cameroon. Cameroon is not a country that I hear very much about um, in the news, etc. So I've been reading up on it. I happen to have a sister who is adopted, and she has traced her family back to Cameroon. So I do have a little bit of knowledge and familiarity there. We haven't done much genealogical research, but I know something about the tribal structures and stuff now. So that's gives me maybe a little bit of a head up. Um, but we went to Kenya a while back. That was on East Africa. Well, so we're back in Africa again, this time on West Africa. And I grew up in America. I'm an American, and I learned my world history from American educational system. We, at least when I was growing up, and where I was growing up, didn't learn a lot about Africa in terms of distinct nations. And you could probably say this for other regions of the world as well. But I knew about Africa as a whole, but I couldn't tell you the difference between the history of Kenya and the history of Cameroon and so on and so on. So putting this together, just putting this page together and reading up on Cameroon, it's so fascinating to me, the individual country histories and the stuff that we don't learn, um, or that I didn't learn. I'll just say it from a personal perspective there. I don't know what the educational system is like in other places of Western Europe, Australia, et cetera. If you guys are learning about African nations, you might, in that you have more of a connection to these places perhaps than we do. But but anyway, it was fascinating for me to put this together and just learn about Cameroon and its history, and then not only as an individual country, but how it fits into the rest of the world in terms of World War I, World War II, all of those other things that have gone on throughout time. What I was talking about with Panama and the difficulty finding people, however, is finding 15 famous Cameroonians who are deceased and are not currently on WikiTree, et cetera. Just frankly, I wasn't able to do it. So I'm breaking one of my rules again, which I do every 3 weeks. I come up with a different rule to break, it seems like. But we are going to have 6 living individuals this time. I don't like to do living individuals if I can avoid it. For privacy and access reasons, we do have to keep their profile somewhat private. So it'll be a little bit of an extra step. If we can find out who their parents or other relations are, we'll get them added. And once we get connected to deceased relatives, it'll be just like any other profile. If somebody particularly wants to work on a profile, I can give you access to the trusted list. So that's something we can do. But it's just a few extra steps that we have to go through that I really prefer to avoid if I can. Also, I mentioned earlier, when you're dealing with living people, the records are often not as available. So if you've got somebody who was born in 1980, chances are all the birth certificates and those kinds of things are going to be private. So it creates a challenge there. But I wasn't able to figure out any other way around it. I tried a few other countries in the area, and they were all a similar situation. So we will stick with Cameroon, and we will just deal with the fact that 6 of our 15 notables are living. But let's go down the list, and I'll introduce you to each of them. Some of them you may actually be familiar with, which was surprising to me as well. But Rudolph Douala Mangabell. This is one we're going to have we're going to have to look into the naming conventions, because Douala basically means he was the king of Douala. So I'm not sure if that's supposed to be in his name or not, or if that's part of his title. So we're going to have to sort that out. Right now, I've got it in there as a middle name because that seems to be how most English sources place it. But that's something we've run into problems with royals of other places, as well as figuring out what's a name, what's a title, what's a first, middle, last name, etc. But he was the king of the Duala tribe, and a resistance leader to the colonization, and was quite prominent back in the 1800s. So he's our earliest notable this time around. Louis Brody, interestingly, he was an actor, born in 1896, died in 1951, but his career was in Germany. He was a German actor. He played traditional, black roles, natives, etc. But he also had a wrestling career and was kind of a film tough guy. So he'll be interesting to trace too. But that's probably going to take us through German records. And this one I'll have a little trouble pronouncing, but Sato Nijimo, I don't know if my glasses on, Nijmola, Nijoya. That NJ sound is a little difficult for me to pronounce. Ruler of the Bamum people in Cameroon. He ruled for something like 50 years. He was in power for quite a while, of one of the biggest tribes in the Cameroon region. So he is so he's an example of someone who probably wouldn't have considered himself Cameroonian, because he probably didn't recognize the political borders that we recognize today. But nonetheless, he's from that region. So we consider him Cameroonian as opposed to Balmum. Amado Hijo, again, I'm terrible with the pronunciations. First president of Cameroon. Don't know much about him, but what I will tell you is Cameroon's only had 2 presidents in its history, and we'll talk about number 2 down the road. But he was president for quite a while. The current president of Cameroon is president number 2. Francis Bebe, finding not only genealogical information, but just basic biographical information has been difficult on some of these. So there are places you can go on that you can Google, you can find on the internet, where you can Google a list of famous Cameroonians. There's quite a few different places. His name comes up on many of them. And yet I wasn't able to find out a whole lot about exactly what makes him more famous than others, other than he's basically a pop star, and some people become more famous and others not so much. But he's a very prominent musician and writer in Cameroon. Similarly, Mano de Bongo, famous saxophonist. You can still buy his albums, both of their albums, on Amazon, etc. So they're very prominent in the entertainment field there. The next individual also broke one of my rules that I've created just recently, and then I forgot about it, and we'll see if this one works for us or not. But this is Christian Toomey. He is the first Roman Catholic cardinal of Cameroon, first and only. He's now deceased. The reason I say that breaks one of my rules, cardinals don't marry and they don't have children. So unless we can find out his parents, we're gonna be stuck. So we found that with the last cardinal that I did. I forget which country that was in, but he had no relationships for us to connect to. So it wound up being a challenge that we weren't able to meet in terms of making him connected. So maybe we'll be able to figure something out about Christian Toomey's parents, but if not, we may be at a loss with him. Mongo Betty was a novelist. He spent much of his life in France. He was in exile. He was an opponent of the politics that were going on in Cameroon, and he was exiled to France. So we may be able to find records on him through spouse, children, etc., over there in France, as opposed to Cameroon. Something for people that don't know, Cameroon was initially a German colony, and it was later taken over and split by France and England. So we had French Cameroon and British Cameroon at the same time. They later merged into the nation of Cameroon. But we have German, French, and British colonization going on there. So all three of those nations may very well come up in our research. Paul Biya is the current president of Cameroon. He is 90 years old. He is the longest serving elected, I don't know if he's elected, but non-royal head of state in the world. There are a couple of kings that have been and sultans that have been longer, but he is the longest serving non-royal head of state in the world today. He took office, I believe, in 1981. So he has been in charge of that country for quite some time. And it'll be interesting to see in all that time if any personal information has been revealed about him. This always fascinates me. The next person on our list, and I think we've had this for probably 5 or 6 out of our 8 and now 9 countries. We have an astronaut from Cameroon. I've been hard pressed to find a country that doesn't have an astronaut that's been in space, and Cameroon is no exception. Patrick Baudry flew on the space shuttle, and he was part of a French mission, I believe, part of the French space program, which again, France was a overseer of the Cameroonian territory at the time. So we may be able to get some connections with him. And a lot of times, it's interesting, even though he was not an American, NASA has a lot of biographical information on him. So we may be able to get a connection on this one. Richard Bona, again, another singer instrumentalist. Don't know much about him, but he's apparently very popular in Africa. Sad story here with Mark Vivian Foe. If I'm pronouncing that name right, he's a professional football player. He was in the middle of a game when he collapsed on the field and died of heart failure. I believe he was 28 years old. He did leave a wife and children. He does have he is Cameroonian, so the records will be there, but it was a huge news story. He's considered a sports hero in that country. A lot of information available about him. We'll just have to see how much of it's genealogical. Another athlete here, we have Francois Mbongo Etone. Mbongo being her maiden name, Etone being her middle name. She was an Olympic gold medalist. If I recall right on this one, she was the first female gold medalist. She's a track star. And I believe she did the long jump, won the gold medal, and brought them their first gold medal from a female athlete. This next individual I am not familiar with, but some of you may be from American television. Andy Arlo is a Cameroonian actress, but she has apparently starred in a couple American television shows. I'm not a Marvel heroes guy, but my understanding is she was in one of the Marvel films. You can click on her bio to see if you're interested in seeing what that was. I don't know if I wrote it in there or not, but we'll get that up there. But I do believe there's a couple of her films or television shows listed right here. She was in, she played Serenity in the motion picture Pitch Perfect 3, which I did see, but I don't recall the character. She played Lieutenant Wendy Seeger on Chicago Fire, another show I watched, but I don't recall the character. And I believe that should say currently in 2023 is starring in the lead role of Nora in the Amazon Prime original series Uploaded, another show I've not seen, but other people may have. And it'll be interesting to see if we can get her connected. And finally, and I believe this is misspelled there. It's Joel Embiid or Embiid. There's a B there. I'll have to go back and correct that. But he is an American basketball player from Cameroon. So currently with the NBA, and that may or may not work to our advantage as far as finding biographical information from him. We'll be able to get a lot on his career, I'm sure, whether or not we can find out who his parents are, et cetera. But what we often find out is with someone like that, if we go to just newspapers.com, somebody maybe did a story about him from his local town or whatever, and we can find out the names of parents, grandparents, et cetera. So those are the kinds of resources we start out with, and we see where they'll take them. So I do believe that this one is going to be one of our bigger challenges, but some of our regulars like Darren and Paul do some amazing work. I don't know how they find out what they find out all the time, but I've learned not to underestimate them, and we'll see where we can go here. But regardless, it'll be fun. And again, I mentioned to people, it's not just about connecting. Connecting is an easy way to keep score. But if we can just get a few more profiles up, the more we get, the more welcoming we become to people from these countries around the world that maybe don't yet feel they have a place on WikiTree. And I think the last 6 months, I guess we've been doing this. I think we've done a really amazing job at getting, I believe we have over 2,000 profiles we've created for the 8 countries that we've been to. So
that's so exciting.
That's
Great job.
Yeah.
And it looks like Paul did show up in the chat.
Yeah, Paul showed up there. That's good. I know Paul doesn't always isn't able to work his work schedule around ours, so I'm glad he was able to check in here.
That's great.
Yeah, and what Paul says here, I've thought about that in terms of doing a group of countries. There's some pros and cons to that idea. So I haven't done it at this point, but we may wind up doing that down the road. It's something that I'm going to throw out now. I wasn't sure I was going to bring it up today or not, but for Paul and Darren in particular, and those that Tommy there has been has been on at times, and Christine as well. I see a few names there that are somewhat regulars with us. We are working on coming up with a permanent project after our 15 nations is up. And we're still working out the logistics on it. But for those that are enjoying this, we're looking at getting a project up that will incorporate all, I think it's 197 nations of the world in a similar in a similar format to what we're doing here. But it would be a permanent project rather than a challenge like we're doing it right now. Simply because this has been a year-long commitment for me and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. But at some point I've got to do other things besides a global tour project. So I don't think I could do a whole second year of it. But we will get something up that is a little more stationary, but will still allow people to get in and work on some of these projects or nations that really get overlooked, I think. And when I say overlooked, I'm not just talking about WikiTree. They're overlooked by the genealogical community as a whole. You can go onto an online bookstore and you can find books on how to do your Swedish roots and your German roots and your French roots. But if you have Cameroonian roots, you're kind of out of luck. So, and you can go to Ancestry and Family Search, you're still not going to find much of anything on Cameroonian roots or Malaysian roots or Kenyan roots. So if we can get something up here where people at least have a landing spot to go to, where they can say, if you want to know about Cameroonian roots, WikiTree has something that can help you out. It may not be the be all, end all.
You have at least a starting point where
but it's a place. Yeah.
Yeah, you've started gathering resources
right.
and information.
And it's something that can grow. So over time, we'll add more information. One of the things that's come up a lot is with the naming conventions. So I'm going to a new nation. You don't have to be from Cameroon, but you may just have relatives that are in Cameroon. But I don't know how to interpret this name. What's the first name? What's the last name?
Right.
Asian names, we run into that with the Chinese names that do them reverse from what we do in the West. South American and Latin American names where they use both the mother's and the father's surname. If you're not familiar with that, well, here's a place that we can go and post that. And then the second question is, now that I understand how to interpret the name, what box do I put the name in?
Right.
Because that is a challenge in and of itself. So if we can come up with some consistent, guidelines for that, maybe we will get, more people, either with roots from those countries or who actually live in those countries. And that works, to everyone's advantage in terms of building the entire tree. So, but that's something I'm excited about. But again, we're still working out a lot of the logistics and the details on it, but it'll be up by the time we end with the 15 nations, we'll have something permanent for people to connect with.
Well, I just want to second what Darren says. Great work, everybody. I mean, it really is really commendable, all the work that's being done.
Yeah, and if you haven't, anybody watching that hasn't joined in, it is really a fascinating project to just, even if you're just watching, but the stuff that we're learning and figuring out. And something I also want to say, I exchanged a conversation with Darren earlier. We've had people going back, I believe it was Darren, it might have been Paul or maybe both of them that I was talking with that have been going back and working on some of the prior nations and making connections. And what I found is when we went to India the first time, keep in mind, none of us have any idea what we're doing. So we just jumped in and figured it out. Well, we spent 3 weeks in India, then we moved on. Well, now it's 6 months later, and we've been working with 8 different countries. And now we go back to India, and we're finding connections that we didn't find the first time around because we didn't necessarily learn more about India, but we've learned more about using alternative sources and thinking outside the box. And I think those of us that have been around from the beginning or from an earlier time frame, without even maybe realizing it, have improved on some of our skills that now going back to the beginning, it's not as overwhelming and as hard as it was when we started out. So now here we are in Cameroon. Again, I don't know anything about Cameroonian research, but I know how we figured it out on the other countries, and we can apply some of those techniques and figure it out in this country.
Well, and that's what I was going to mention earlier, is that even if somebody isn't experienced in some of these countries, it really is a great community to learn with. Mm-hmm. Learn from each other, learn together. So it's really a great opportunity that way.
Yeah. It's really it's taken me in a direction that I had no idea it was going to take me when this wasn't my idea. Somebody assigned this project to me. I accepted, but I really had. They asked. I was asked if I would like to help put together a project, and what I didn't realize was what they meant by help put together was put it together myself.
Well, you've done a wonderful job.
Yeah, so I had no idea where we were going or what this was going to turn into, but
and like Paul says,
I'm really glad we did.
Paul says he's much more comfortable.
Right. Yeah.
Trying other countries now, so that's really great.
And even coordinating, the relationships we've created with each other as a team. I've become familiar with what each of these guys has kind of mastered, and I know who does what. And sometimes when I hear a connection was made, I can tell you off the top of my head who probably made it because I know what each person's specialty is, and that. So our ability to kind of work as a team has really been a pleasure as well.
That's great. Well, if nobody has any questions, I think we'll go ahead and close out.
Okay. And so as I always tell people, the Cameroon project is not open until tomorrow officially. So it is, there is no links. You can access it though by going to any of the other countries and replacing that country's name in the address bar with Cameroon. So go to Panama's page, replace Panama with Cameroon, it'll take you there. It is unlocked. I just don't have any links currently up to get it. Tomorrow I will post a G2D post and you'll be able to access it through there as well. But if you want to get a head start and start working on some of this tonight, feel free to jump in. It's ready to go. And also, I've also mentioned, as a leader and the profile manager, I can see things often that other people can't. So there are things that sometimes people have told me they can't see, and I don't know that because I can see it. So if there's something, a picture missing, or a link that isn't working, let me know, because I may be oblivious to that, and I won't catch on my own. So please let me know that.
And if
thank you,
you're
Azure,
watching,
for
oh yeah,
thank you
my
for
pleasure.
hosting today, and for your video. And I look
And I just
forward to
wanted to
seeing what we can do
mention,
again. But
I just wanted to mention that if you're watching this after we are live now, I'm going to add the link for Cameroon into the description of this video, so you'll be able to get to that. So I'll do that right after the video ends.
okay, so there's another way to get to it. Yeah.
All right. Well, it was
Okay.
great talking to you, David.
All right.
We'll
Good
see
seeing
everybody later.
Good luck in Cameroon.